you know what? This is actually not the worst idea in the world. You know, this is a crazy thought, and it's something that would drastically change hockey as we know it, but what I wanted to do in this video was respond to an article published on TVA Sports from earlier this week. This was from June 9th, it's French, I translated it to English, and the title of the article reads this: The NHL draft reduced to 4 rounds? At least, that's what Sportsnet insider Elliotte Friedman suggested during his most recent 32 Thoughts podcast. Now, okay, before we go out there and read what Friedman said, and where exactly this is coming from, let's talk about the draft as we know it. There are, 32 multiplied by 7? I should have known that right off the bat. 32 times 7 is 224 draft picks in the 2024 NHL draft. And I think there might actually be an extra one because one of the teams is getting another pick. I don't know. I could check it on Cap Friendly, but hey, we're not going to be able to use that website in a few weeks, so why bother? This is the format that everybody's been used to. All 32 teams have 7 rounds worth of selections, and honestly, it wasn't always like that either. There were some years where the NHL had 9 rounds in the draft, and you could get these really long and drawn-out TV programs of selecting guys that nobody's ever heard of, and these random teenagers from all over the world, and it's been the style for the past few years, right? But when it comes to the NHL draft compared to some of the other drafts around the sporting world, not all of these drafts have 200 plus picks. In fact, the NHL draft is one of the only ones. Hockey drafts in general are notoriously long, and it makes everybody's job a little bit difficult when you want to see, okay, my team drafted a guy in the 9th round. Let's see what he's about, and there's like nothing available about him on the internet. It was even crazier back when you had no internet and people had to look at radio broadcasts or newspaper articles to see what a prospect was like. But I digress. Getting back from the history of the drafts, it's long, and when you compare to like the NBA draft, for example, you've got 2 rounds worth of guys. That's it. There are only so many names that are taken every single year, and it's a lot more of a limited sample. Now, you can say there are differences because, hey, some of these guys are not 18 years old when they're drafted. It's not really like the NHL's system, and a lot of these players will be a lot older, etc., etc. You could say the same thing about other sports, but with that in mind, knowing that the NHL and hockey in general has these long, long drafts, let's go out there and read what Elliotte Friedman had to say on the 32 Thoughts podcast. Several agents who are around the NHL find that the NHL entry draft is too long. These agents would like the selection session to last only 4 rounds instead of the current 7. Still, according to Friedman, it would even be likely that several members of the NHLPA would agree with this proposal too, and that it could be on the table during negotiations of the next collective bargaining agreement. Okay, so NHL agents and maybe even NHLPA people would be interested in the idea of shortening the draft by 3 rounds, from 7 to 4. I will say that would make it a lot easier for all of us at home to watch the second day of the NHL entry draft, literally halving the amount of rounds we'd have to sit through. You gotta remember, this thing takes 8 hours on TV. It is crazy. But going out there and halving that, making it 4 hours instead, okay, that sounds a lot more doable. Plus, I mean, let's be honest here. How many guys are taken in the NHL draft past round 4 that actually make the show anyway? It's so rare that, sure, it makes for a great story when you have a 6th-round guy who's drafted out of nowhere and then he becomes an NHL player a few years down the line. But then again, what happened to the 50 guys taken before him, or the 50 guys taken after him? Probably most of them are not smelling NHL ice anytime soon. It's very, very tough. And honestly, I like the idea of shortening the draft because it makes the draft process as a whole much more competitive. And the reason I say that is because all of a sudden, if you've got 4 draft picks compared to 7 in any given draft class year, it makes your options on choosing a lot more important. Hey, you have to make sure you take the right guy. It allows your scouting team to think more so about guys that are more likely to be NHL players because, okay, we're not going to think about this guy that we could have drafted in the 207th overall spot as our late round last pick of the day kind of pick. We have to use all of our assets in this league for this 4th round caliber guy because this is the better player compared to the 7th round guy. And in a way, you could say this also makes the prospect scene more competitive as well, because guys will have so few spots in order to be drafted, it will, in a way, make these players want to play harder and get rewarded for better play by being selected in the top 4, rather than being selected somewhere near the end of the 7th round, for example. If a player knows, okay, if I don't really get my ass into gear, I might not even get drafted because the draft is getting halved in size, then all of a sudden those guys are going to have to play better. And it makes everybody around them better, right? And when it comes to the guys that would have been late round steals anyway, the guy that was destined to being a 7th round tweener who eventually found his way into the show, those stories become a lot more rare, and it becomes a lot easier for NHL teams to just snag guys up in free agency, leading to better stories for these young players, because all of a sudden it's like, hey, either you're going to get drafted as an overager because you're already really good, or if you become a free agent, you can choose your destiny, and there will be a lot of hype around you. Having the players choose their own destiny, I'd say, is a lot better than seeing random 17-year-old guys from Belarus be told, hey, for the next 5 years, your NHL draft rights belong to this one team and you've got no say over it. You can request a trade, but why would you do that? You're drafted by an NHL team. All of these other NHL teams had 200 picks to pick you, and they didn't. So it makes everything a lot more competitive, and I like that. It's tighter if you halved the NHL draft. Elliotte Friedman as well went out there and said that of the players who didn't receive a contract offer after being drafted, most of them are ladder choices. Very few of them were early round picks. Friedman also adds that players find themselves tied to the teams that draft them sometimes more than 4 years before they make the jump to the pros, and that some of them decide to sign elsewhere or simply do not receive offers at the end of the day. This means that all players who are not drafted during the 4 rounds would become free agents as soon as they were no longer eligible to be selected. If this proposal comes to fruition, it would be the 2nd time since 2005 that the number of rounds in a draft has been reduced. That year, the amateur draft was reduced from 9 to 7 rounds. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this entire idea here. Do you like the NHL entry draft in the way that it is right now? Would you rather see this get shortened? Would you like to see half the amount of rounds that are on TV in day 2 and removing 3 out of the 7 total rounds? Honestly, as we're getting into a more competitive style of hockey being taught and developed, because hockey programs are getting smarter, because they're getting better, because equipment is improving, because everything is getting bigger and bolder and records are being broken, why not make it even more competitive by saying, hey, you're producing more points than anybody has in your league before, NTDP guys, I'm looking at you, but now the NHL entry draft is reduced by half, so you have to be really, really good if you want to hear your name called by one of these 32 teams. It's an idea I like, half because I think it would make the draft selection process better and more quality, but I also do think that the programming on TV is way too long, so having the amount of rounds that we'd have to sit through in day 2 is kind of a blessing in disguise, in my opinion. But of course, not all of y'all are content creators who have to do this stuff for a living. Of course, if you are, then awesome. Great. Love to see some more faces in this YouTube space, but for now, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the idea of the NHL reducing its draft by 3 rounds. Do you like this? Elliotte Friedman says some agents do, and some NHLPA people might as well. What are your thoughts about it? Let me know in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.